In the wake of September 11th, the United States invaded Afghanistan in an attempt to defeat al-Qaeda, capture Osama bin Laden, and overthrow the Taliban.
Even though the United States damaged and weakened al-Qaeda, we did not capture or kill Osama bin Laden. And because of that, the mission drifted into an open-ended nation-building effort that has lasted now 8 years.
Today, it's not clear that the United States is preparing to adopt an exit strategy. President Obama may commit the military to a much longer and costlier engagement.
This will not be quick nor easy. But we must never forget, this is not a war of choice. This is a war of necessity.
I would say this about defining success in Afghanistan and Pakistan. In the simplest sense, the Supreme Court test for another issue, we'll know it when we see it.
For someone like Richard Holbrooke to say that we'll know success when we see it, it just goes to show that 8 years into this mission, we still have yet to clearly articulate our goals.
That's why I announced a new comprehensive strategy in March. And this strategy acknowledges that military power alone will not win this war, that we also need diplomacy and development and good governance.
Armies find Afghanistan easy to invade but impossible to govern. The Persians, Greeks, Arabs, Turks, the Mongols, the British, and the Soviets have gone down this road and all have failed.
Who is our enemy? Is it al-Qaeda? Is it the Taliban? Is it indigenous Pashtun militants? And what is success? Is success when we see a flourishing Jeffersonian democracy? Is success when we bring some semblance of stability to this region?
We've already outworn our welcome, and we need to understand that.
Many defenders of a large military presence in Afghanistan say it's necessary to crush the Taliban and keep al-Qaeda from regrouping.
Those who attacked America on 9/11 are plotting to do so again. If left unchecked, the Taliban insurgency will mean an even larger safe haven from which al-Qaeda would plot to kill more Americans. So this is not only a war worth fighting, this is fundamental to the defense of our people.
A large military footprint is counterproductive. It antagonizes the local inhabitants, and it allows the U.S. to be played off by one tribal or ethnic faction against another.
A large-scale, long-term military presence in Afghanistan would undermine America's strategic interests in many ways. It would hand al-Qaeda a potent recruiting tool that they would use to bring more militants to their cause. It would also deeply undermine neighboring nuclear in Pakistan. It also will feed the perception of a foreign occupation and would, of course, not gain the support of the Afghans themselves.
Weakening al-Qaeda can be done with a much smaller military presence, working with any player in Afghanistan that's willing to work with us against al-Qaeda.
Officials in both the Bush and Obama White Houses have stressed that eradicating opium poppies and processing is necessary to defeat al-Qaeda and the Taliban.
Our attempt to eradicate opium poppy cultivation drives farmers into the arms of the Islamic radicals and undermines any pro-American political forces in Afghanistan.
The population that we can least afford to alienate, the ones that live in the areas where the Taliban comes from, are inextricably connected to the opium poppy trade. The quickest way to turn a man into an insurgent is to burn his livelihood.
Earlier this year, the U.S. government actually made a startling admission. They found out that al-Qaeda actually pulls none of its resources from the opium drug trade in Afghanistan. The Taliban do, but not al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda is our enemy. So continuing to go after the drug processing facilities and eradicating opium is a pure waste of resources.
The drug trade amounts to better than a third of Afghanistan's gross domestic product. Somewhere between 30 and 35% of Afghan families are involved directly or indirectly in the drug trade.
The Obama administration has made one important change in the war in Afghanistan, and that is not going after every local farmer who is affiliated with the drug processing and opium processing in Afghanistan. Right now, they have a more targeted strategy of going after the farmers who are affiliated with the Taliban insurgency. That's a much more pragmatic approach.
Many advocates for continuing a large-scale mission in Afghanistan say that America must build a national representative government there that can govern, defend, and sustain itself. But that goal is at odds with the nature of Afghanistan itself.
Thus far, the United States has been recklessly ambitious in what they hope to achieve in Afghanistan. The country itself is very poverty-stricken, deeply divided, tribal-based society. It will not look like a sort of flourishing Jeffersonian democracy in any sense of the word.
Afghanistan is where Europe was in the 11th or 12th century.
As late as the 1970s, the Soviet Union tried to impose their Marxist dogma onto Afghan tribes, bringing about universal suffrage, allowing women to choose their own husbands, taking away private property, and this stoked an enormous backlash amongst the conservative elements of society.
So what does the United States do in the face of an open-ended war, occupation, and nation-building exercise with no clear endgame?
My concern with Afghanistan is that the longer we stay and the more money we spend, the more we'll feel compelled to remain in the region to validate that investment. This sort of self-imposed predicament has plagued U.S. policymakers for many wars and many different campaigns. Afghanistan will be unstable whether we stay or whether we leave. What we need to do is minimize the costs of continued involvement and scale down our presence from the region.
The United States is going to take a hit to its credibility when it leaves Afghanistan without achieving its nation-building mission. That's a mission we shouldn't have undertaken in the first place.
I would advise the Obama administration to begin to narrow their objectives in this region. Number one, to target al-Qaeda rather than the broader Taliban insurgency. Again, al-Qaeda was responsible for 9/11, and containing them is a feasible strategy that can be done with surgical airstrikes, ongoing intelligence cooperation with foreign governments, and also special operations forces and special operations missions for discrete targets along the Pakistani border region. I would hope that the Obama administration begins to disregard the conventional wisdom on this war, which tells us that if we're in Afghanistan with 100,000 troops for another 12 to 14 years, we can really bring change to this country. We can stay in Afghanistan for another 50 years, and we will not bring about the change that we hope to see there.